Hey everyone, welcome to Exploring Health, Macro to Micro. I'm your host, Parker Condit. This is part 2 of the episode with Greg McLean. This picks up right in the middle of the conversation, so if you haven't already, please go back and listen to part 1, which includes the full introduction and background for Greg. So without further ado, please enjoy part 2 of my conversation with Greg McLean. So can you describe TMJ?
Yeah, so like the TM joints, basically temporomandibular joints, we basically have them on each side. Basically, it's going to be the joint responsible for basically our mandible kind of moving, chewing, doing life. But oftentimes our teeth are going to dictate what happens to things. So it's like if we developed, we can't breathe through our nose, our tongue comes down. This is where they found out in the late 70s, early 80s, like Harvard did all these studies with they plugged all these chimpanzees and rhesus monkeys' noses with silicone to see what happened when people stopped nasal breathing. And basically what we saw was like every different kind of malocclusion. Basically the body is smart. The minute I can't move air to nasal breathe, my tongue's coming down to act as a kickstand to open my mouth because I need to breathe. Like that's ultimate hierarchy in life. And the compensation for each monkey was all over the board relative to just environment, development, all that stuff. And so as a result, when we can't nasal breathe and we're mouth breathing, it's like our occlusion is going to get thrown off because it's like my upper and lower jaw are basically like two halves of a basketball. Like I basically want them to stack nicely over each other. And the minute I can't hold that posture because the forces inside aren't balanced to keep the outside forces, then it's kind of like everything gets thrown off. It's like the scoliosis of your freaking mouth. And then it's just kind of like your joints that want to be balanced, they can only stay neutral and balanced the minute I literally kind of have the two halves over each other. These joints can't be balanced anymore. And when they get thrown off, then it's kind of like my occlusion, the way I bite, everything is like this skewed, torqued version. And then oftentimes, as we're developing, our teeth continue down this path. And then it's like we can't ever get our joints back to a balanced place because the teeth don't fit in such a way that we can do that.
All right, so can you describe how that's going to relate to posture? Because, Mike K was always hammering this. Like, you can't just change somebody's head position and say they're in a better posture. But there's a lot of like really bad posture advice out there, which is like, oh, sit up straight, shoulders back and down. Can you speak to how if you can't breathe, that's bad advice?
What is bad advice?
Saying like, oh, if you have a forward head position, that's bad posture. So just pull your head back. Now you're in good posture. But I think kind of describing what you were just going through. Whereas if you can sit in what visually looks like good posture. But the second you stop paying attention and in this position, you can't nasal breathe, you're going to shoot back forward and the jaw's going to drop down. So you can open up your gullet so you can breathe again. So I think a lot of the posture advice is misinformed, but if you want to expand on any of that, feel free to.
Yeah, like I think like the first part is like if we can't support basically the palate because the tongue doesn't fit, our head's going to come forward and we're going to extend. So the last thing I want to do is shoot my head back because I'm essentially going to shut down my airway. That's like just straight up. So it's like I think people don't understand that like the minute like this isn't balanced and my head comes forward, it's like it's got a top down effect, kind of like a puppet, where it's like the minute this gets off, it's like a secondary force to gravity. And then oftentimes when you've lived into that long enough, like those patterns bias everything in the body. And then it's just like to get that back online is some serious work. So like, therefore it's like even best case scenario for a lot of these, especially like, I think like ideals like 20 to 45-year-old women tend to be like 80 to 90% of people with TMJ issues, neck problems. And part of it is that like they can't support the head properly. And then we've got like basically like this ribs and pelvis that are flared out because the head doesn't sit over the midline. So the best case for some of these people, at least prior to getting interventions done, is like at least training from the bottom up to kind of get things in the most mechanical advantageous posture as possible to at least help support as much as possible.
Do you have an example of what that looks like training from the bottom up?
So it'd be even like a 90-90 where like someone lays on their back, right? So especially for someone that can't support the weight of their head, we want to use the floor because it's going to help. Basically, I can push into the floor. Like I'd lay on my back, my feet would be up on a wall, and maybe I'd put like a dodgeball between my knees at 90 degrees. And then this is oftentimes where we basically have now grounded the feet. So I basically have a hard surface in which for them to find stability. And now it's like teaching them how to basically feel their pelvis where it is in space. And oftentimes, forward head posture means I'm going to have a pelvis that's dumped, kind of like a bowl that's spilled out. So it's like teaching them how to start to find the bowl. And then the minute they can find the bowl is like teach them how to take the shoulder blades that basically kind of splay and teach them to stack the ribs and pelvis so that they can kind of get their body basically, at least when they're on the floor, start to find access to their diaphragm and their pelvis and rib stacking. And then something like that they could use as a foundational, little by little, be able to get off the floor and then get out of neck pain, at least while they're trying to get some good help.
So people who are going to have that sort of like palate or mouth presentation, are they going to be people that have trouble producing intra-abdominal pressure?
Yeah, and it's oftentimes like the forward head like sets the stage for the domino effect, basically like all the way down, that like posturally everything gets out of line, and then it's almost like this secondary force to gravity, and then it's just like it's almost like the muscles have lived in such a bad posture for long enough that it's hard to actually get them back to this basically position where the ribs pelvis kind of work as a team, and then they actually have access. Because if I can't basically find the pelvis underneath me, I'm not going to have good access to my diaphragm. And this is where just kind of teaching someone like, the ribs and the pelvis, it's basically like a corset effect, like back in the 1800s Western movie. It's basically like this internal sports bra that basically holds ribs and pelvis together so that I can kind of get the piston effect of my basically ribs.
All right. So for people listening, you have your thoracic diaphragm. That's usually what people think about when you're talking about breathing. And then you also have your pelvic floor. Those two should be working in concert when you're breathing. So when you're inhaling, both of them should be kind of descending. So your thoracic diaphragm sort of pushes stuff down, and your pelvic floor also needs to descend, because as you push the thoracic diaphragm down, you have stuff here and that needs to go somewhere. So you need to open up that space for it to go down. But kind of what you're describing is a pelvis that's going to be sort of tilted forward. So the diaphragm may or may not be moving as well as it should be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We just basically lost our good anchorage point.
Yep. Yeah. So again, for anyone who's listening about, like, we're just talking about mouth stuff, but a lot of it starts here, and you get a cascading effect going down the system as well. And the question earlier, to kind of bring that down to a more grounded level, when I said, are people with this presentation going to have trouble producing intra-abdominal pressure? You're going to have trouble producing that pressure when the diaphragms aren't working together, basically when the rib cage isn't properly stacked over the pelvis. And then again, the head isn't properly stacked over the rib cage as well. So there's sort of these tiered effects where things work really well when they're all aligned, and not so well when they're not.
Exactly.
Trying to think where to take this now. Did you have any other interventions besides the ones?
I guess, yeah. Like I think the one that's really awesome is there's a procedure called the nasal valve that the basically repair, and it's called the Vivere, and they basically take like a resonance wand that like heats up, and basically like it's non-surgical. It probably took longer to numb the nose than for the actual treatment. And they basically go in and hold spots inside your nose, almost like they're kind of banging out like dents in a car. And then basically what it does is it's got like a holding effect for like 5 to 7 years, but it's basically remolding a nasal valve that's lost. It's like imagine someone crushed your hose in your backyard. It's like someone basically went and banged it out to kind of give it back its integrity because like that's going to be the number one factor. Even if you fix someone's palate, if you haven't basically reopened the nasal valve, people can't move pressure to switch to nasal breathing.
Hmm. Any others?
That's it for now.
Okay, so we're an hour in. That's all you've done at this point. Okay. So which one of these had the biggest effect for your sleep? Because I do want to kind of start diving into sleep and some of the sleep related symptoms and disorders. But like, at which stage, or what do you think it was cumulative, or was there one where I was like, oh, this had a big effect?
You know what? Like it's I think the palate expansion was huge from like just giving me literally the Sarpy from, but then it was kind of like one of those things where this is where I actually learned that there's fatigue outside of the whole breathing sleep apnea. This is like relative to a nervous system that's got like joints and an occlusion that's not balanced and not happy. So when I got into this, I thought like, yes, like I have the jaw of a 5-year-old. Like I can't breathe. I can't sleep well. And then it's like, I didn't understand until I had gone through all that stuff that like now I can breathe amazing, but like that was a component of my fatigue. But from my brain fog and fatigue perspective, which has been my biggest two symptoms for the last 5 years, like every day debilitating, that like this last treatment is what really started to change that.
Okay. Can you describe the mechanisms between that and maybe just describe like how the different fatigues feel?
Yeah, I guess it's like even my doctor now is like, how would you say you feel? And I'm like, I haven't woken up feeling good in so many years, ever, not one day. That like I just always felt like I had been drinking for a week straight and then like just seriously hungover every day. And then it's like some days were really, really bad. Like I can't keep my car in the lines when I drive to work to I think I'm driving the wrong way in a freaking parking lot. And then it's just like this last few weeks, it's like I dream every night and then it's like to oh wow, like I wake up and like I just feel like I don't feel like death.
Okay. So yeah, that's a good description. Um, all right. So the palate expansion that helped with probably the sleep. So can you describe sort of the what I guess you're describing as like nervous system fatigue
Yeah.
and where you think that's coming from?
So this is where like I've learned just like all the research between like Ron that started PRI, like understanding like freedom of the mandible, and then basically like there's this whole other science to long-term nervous system health, and it comes through occlusion. I think oftentimes it's like our teeth are the very essence of like the circuit which runs our brain. And like the minute our occlusion is off and our joints aren't balanced, or we grind down our teeth to where the height is off, it's like we have all these sensors in our jaw, and just all of our proprioception comes from basically our TMJ joints, our occlusion, and our cervical vertebrae. And if those three are not balanced, it's like all the intel we're taking in all day long tends to be off. And then it's just like we have to compensate. So it's like we don't know where they've done tons of studies on rats. It's like they remove molars and this and that. It's like they compare it to like basically elderly people that they've lost their spatial awareness, they've lost cognitive ability. And you take kids with Tourette's, you take all this different stuff. It's like the minute you add vertical height to some of these kids whose basically teeth aren't the right height with the right occlusion, and like ticks go away, bedwetting goes away, like all this stuff, you're like, this is like insane. And I think that's like the biggest thing is like there's this whole long term health that ties in. to when our vertical height of our teeth are like the right height, like from basically a nervous system perspective, like even like the acetylcholine in our like synapses in our brain, like is like right. And when they do all these studies, check people like Parkinson's and all this stuff, it's like the very essence of these studies where they take the molars out of these teeth, different stuff along those lines. You're like, dude, this is like, and this is where like I started learning from this Dr. Dwight Jennings. He did Mike K had a wizard brother. It'd be like this Dr. Dwight Jennings out of Oakland. Dude, he reminds me of him. Like, dude, he's just a smart dude. And the biggest thing, I've never heard another human talk about this, is he basically says that like we have this neuromodulator, it's called substance P, and like the minute our bite and our occlusion, our TMJ is off, like the trigeminal nerve gets pissed off. Then he basically said we have this influx from these issues of substance P, and he literally talks about like every known disease. He's like, dude, this just floods the system. And he's basically like, even from like a Lyme disease, he basically says it like basically uncouples the cells, depolarizes them, and like the very essence of this stuff. But like, I don't think any of that would hit home until most people don't understand that like most people's jaws are underdeveloped, which means like this mechanism is the thing for everyone. But like people might hear this and not understand. But then it's just like, okay, that makes sense because like everyone doesn't know that like they have what he's talking about, which is why this mechanism is driving. And I'm like,
I'll definitely Dwight Jennings. I'll definitely look him up.
yeah. He has a 2-part with Dave Asprey.
Okay.
So he does like for Bulletproof. It's pretty interesting.
Cool. So when you're talking about sort of the sensory function of kind of teeth or what it can be, the circuitry, do you think in boxing, when some guys are described as having a glass jaw, do you think their circuitry is just more delicate than other people?
So he literally, Dr. Dwight Jennings talks about this in a podcast. So basically, Muhammad Ali, right? He said he broke his jaw and no one would touch it because it was Muhammad Ali. And then he just talks about like, but like, this is where I think, and he just talks about this. So like, if you're a mouth breather, you're already predisposed to stuff getting worse because, you know, if your tongue fits on your palate and you get hit from a concussion standpoint, at least you're probably had the stabilizing effect versus a mouth breather gets hit. The lower upper jaw are basically going to super torsion because like they're not coupled with basically the chin strap we call our tongue. And then like you start to take like this, and I'm like, I think just after the fact, you've got that torsion effect from basically the palate not being sealed. And now you have whatever neutral used to be is like slightly off. And now it's like everything we're looking for is wrong in the beginning. And then it's like our nervous system goes looking for neutral. And it's like, but this is where I like really think for anyone that's had a bad concussion and then or even not even that bad, and then they start to have some weird neurological or symptoms show up a few years later, like this is the very essence of like I would tell people to start there.
Because you feel like it would just be like that low level, constant, like you can't ever fully relax because the circuits aren't properly aligned.
Yeah, and I mean all the best stuff I say is like they use the word covert. It's like it's below our conscious understanding. Like we don't know.
Yeah.
And then it just builds and builds and builds until it shows up. And then it's often so far away from the incident that we can't tie the two together.
Right.
And regular medicine isn't looking for this. So who's going to catch it?
Yep. That'll make sense. Yeah, it's like it's one of the many perfect storms where things can get missed.
Yeah.
All right. So can you talk more about sleep, some of the sleep issues? Is snoring a red flag that people should be looking out for? I guess let's just start there, and then I want to go into OSA.
Yeah, like I think so. It's like snoring can be indicative of sleep apnea, but like it doesn't mean because you snore that you have sleep apnea, if that makes sense. So it's like for kids, you don't want kids that snore, and it's kind of like one of those things. Ideal situation is that we nasal breathe all the time. That tells us that like we've got sufficient basically pipes in our nose to do the job. to ensure we're not being robbed of quality when it comes to our sleep.
Okay. And then, so on the obstructive sleep apnea side, can you describe the difference between that and upper airway resistance syndrome, which I had to look up when you'd emailed it to me?
Yeah, yeah.
Just because it's like the research I did, it seems like UARS is just like a catch-all thing for what is outside of obstructive sleep apnea. But I'd love
Yeah,
for you
yeah.
if you could just describe a little bit more about the nuance between those two.
Yeah, I think like one of the things I've seen is like with OSA, right? Like I always say, like think of like the your fat uncle that fell asleep watching a football game. He's got the beer gut, 50 pounds overweight. He's snoring in the middle of the day. So oftentimes, like you've got someone that basically they've got more of a robust system. So think like a skinny marathon runner versus like the farm boy from Nebraska that's throwing bales of hay that like literally he's just got massive forearms. So if you think of like two archetypes, the OSA tends to be someone with bigger pipes. And as a result, they either partially or stop breathing from an apnea or hypopnea standpoint. And what tends to happen with OSA is it tends to be more of your metabolic stuff. So you think like type 2 diabetes, you think basically anyone with like heart issues. I mean, I know a few guys personally actually that have had heart attacks from sleep apnea and then they ended up getting a CPAP. But it's oftentimes, kind of that. It's more of like a metabolic, it's going to affect. But like, then I think from a UARS, basically it tends to be like, I think my doc called it like skinny modern day sleep apnea, young, fit, male, female, but like, and this is where I think like with these, it's like you're not actually apnea, hypopnea. It's more like labored breathing. And then as a result, you look at like UARS and it like if I was going to bucket people, it's like all your somatic symptoms like Lyme disease, IBS, chronic fatigue, that you're just like fibromyalgia. But you start to take like autism, ADHD, like all that stuff. And it's like more of like a neurological as it relates to the airway. And I think oftentimes it's more of a sensitized airway that's neurological in effect versus like the OSA, which tends to just be like snoring or they stop breathing, they like wake themselves up. They're
I'm
all
laughing
like the
because
two different
yeah,
camps. Yeah.
I have an uncle who I always think of, yeah. So if people fall into either of those two camps, are there different like paths that you would send people down?
Yeah. So I guess it's like this, right? The gold standard is like a CPAP, which I think is trash. Straight up. Like, I mean, literally like outside of, well, I guess I'll start here. I think a lot of modern medicine doesn't even know that like expansion for adults is a thing. So I literally think like WatchPat 1 is probably like the best at home for like testing. And I remember there was a rep here and I asked her, is there anyone that sells your device in Arizona that would even offer the option of someone getting palate expansion if they were diagnosed as an adult? She's like, I don't have anyone. So then I ended up talking to a doctor and he has 5 sleep clinics. He's in his 40s here. And I was like, yeah, like, do you refer any people to do palate expansion? He's like, I'll do some research. He's like, I found a place in Vegas. I'm like, dude, I can name 20 places in Arizona. But this is where like I had a good conversation with him. Like he just literally doesn't know. Like the science is there. And then it's just like, I guess the hardest thing, right, is the scope of practice means that doctors can only sell what is in their wheelhouse. And I guess the hardest thing is doing the right thing at the cost of taking money out of your own pocket as a doctor. And so I think the issue becomes like if someone's going to always go the ethical route, it's like that's not even enough because a lot of people don't understand. But I think for many people, like expansion is a really good option. And then for those that don't want to do this, right? Like you basically either have a mandibular device, which basically is going to reposition the jaw to kind of help or like a CPAP. And then what I really like is basically from like old people perspective is the Vivos I did. Like I've seen 60 and 70-year olds, like I think this is covered by Medicare now. And it's like I've seen 60, 70-year olds, literally, you don't have to have surgery. And I've seen it double the size of some older people's airways. And then it's just like either that or with a CPAP, but like you can do both at the same time. Or I think like that many kids now, like I talk to so many moms every week that like their kids have like sleep apnea, like, and it's like to hear daily. I mean, you've seen the guys that work at my gym to see, I have moms tell me about 4 and 5-year-old kids that have bigger jaws than every person I work with.
Yeah. I was just thinking of the guys that work there. Yeah.
But it's like, I got one guy that has a six pack. He was a pro golfer. He's 32. He has severe sleep apnea. You look at all these guys, they're all fit. I got another guy, he went through his handlebars with his top six teeth when he was a kid. Jaw never developed. So he's got like a super small, like that's going to be a nightmare for him to fix. And then I got a third guy that's like probably about your age, same thing, like big dude. Said it takes him 20 minutes to uncouple his jaw on one side every day when he wakes up in the morning. And all these dudes got six packs. They look like health. And then you got, Ando that works for us. Like he had his wisdom teeth removed when he was 20. They literally removed his back molars, bottom molars on each side from like cavities, didn't replace them. And then I'm sitting there reading yesterday about studies for increased likelihood of Parkinson's due to not having your back teeth and the vertical height. And I'm like, dude, these are all healthy looking dudes.
Yep. Yeah. Until other things start presenting.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I do want to get into the trigeminal nerve. If you can kind of explain what that is. You talked about it quite a bit, and then I think we just start wrapping up just with like resources, of which I think there are going to be a lot.
Yeah. I would say like if you think of like the trigeminal nerve, like think like a Jason mask, right? Like that's kind of basically the front of our face all the way down. And then it's basically got like three branches that basically like come above and below the mouth and then kind of the forehead. And basically like 50% of our sensory and motor in our brain is tied to that one nerve. And basically it connects down to like the C3, and it's like all on one freaking track. And this is where oftentimes, because the muscles of the face, the jaw, and the cervical vertebrae are all kind of tethered together on the same ride, like that if they're not balanced, I lack stability for this super powerful nerve. And what ends up happening a lot of times is like, whether it's severe or if even it's a low level, it's like this covert stimulation. And then what tends to happen is like this covert stimulation of the trigeminal nerve goes on. And then oftentimes it's like this poor signaling that is a reflection of this that like tends to start to signal other stuff. And this is where like things go sideways. And then just you've got a nervous system that's literally been like sensitized all because like this is off. And then you've got a kid that's hypersensitive to everything from allergies to nervous system and you name it. But like there's so much there from like just health issues, especially tied to the nervous system.
Okay. Is there a person who speaks about this specifically? The trigeminal nerve?
Yeah, like so I think like the neuromuscular dentist is key. And like for someone that understands it, and I think more so like someone that's a neuromuscular dentist that has a specialization in TMD, which is basically the TM joint dysfunction. I think oftentimes will kind of maybe a functional dentist might understand it versus someone that's maybe more qualified to treat it. Might be someone in that world. And then, I've just found that there's those with, I think there's some that just treat it with Botox and splints for the rest of your life. And then some that'll go in and fix the occlusion with braces and stuff like that.
Okay, cool. So gosh, I have so many notes already, but I do want to circle back to the dentist, right? So if they're, you speak to a lot of parents, what are questions either for themselves or for their kids? What are questions that they can and should be asking if they're worried about this or suspect this is what's happening and it's not being diagnosed?
I think first and foremost, there's this biometric marker that called the intermolar width that I think is humongous. It's not that it's everything, but I think it's very important. And I think for every parent moving forward to kind of be at least under the care of someone in that world that understands that to monitor your child is important because like 40% of our facial development is done by the time we're like 4 years old. So I think there's this kind of someone that's going to help steer your child if like by 5 or 6 there's intervention that needs to be done. But like this, I would say that's really important. And then I think searching out like a pediatrician, especially too, that works with someone that's like a functional dentist or a pediatric dentist that does expansion, I think is really important because most pediatricians don't even know. So then they start your kid on asthma meds or this and that, and they're 5 or 6. And it's like, rather than just kind of getting them the right help, I think that's important. And then a regular dentist that's actually going to ask, like, how is your child sleeping? Like, do they snore? Do they keep their mouth closed when they sleep or when they're breathing all day long? Like, I think those are like really important questions, just low level to kind of catch things early on.
Hmm. So on the intermolar width, is there a way to measure that? Is like there something you can buy, or do you just like put a piece of paper in your mouth and stomp down on it?
Yeah, like I have like these little wax bite plates, and obviously it's not like a 3D CT scan, but it's like at least kind of gives people like an idea. And literally, like they're like these wax squares, you can cut them down. Um, there's a lot of little things you kind of figure out a way to just literally have your kid bite down and kind of have an understanding.
Is that
But I
something
think
that,
what's go ahead.
sorry, you can finish. I got this question written down.
I would just say like I think that's really important for parents to like have a dentist or a doctor that understands that that even matters. Because if they don't understand airway and its long term effects on your kid's health. Like straight up, like I don't care if they're your neighbor, they're awesome, that's cool, they're a good human, but like long term for your kid, like that is so important. That's huge.
Yep. Okay. Is that something that can be measured from an X-ray?
Um, I mean, technically, you probably could. I don't know, like for little kids, like how often. I guess I speak with people a lot of times that like they're taking their kids and they'll do the 3D scans because like people want to check. I think the other really important thing is finding a pediatrician or airway doc that is looking and measuring your child's nasal resistance because that is the number one thing. Like your kid will have a mouth breathing problem because of nasal resistance, and that should always be accounted for. So even the best, I think, airway docs, orthos are working in conjunction with an ENT, and it's called four-phase rhinomanometry, where an ENT can actually measure your child. And there's some pediatric dentists that actually have them. So it's a tool that they can use in conjunction pre-post treatment to kind of basically look at age, height, and kind of like just the normalized data. And often it will tell like, is your child breathing well? Can they move air? And if they can't, where the issues lie structurally.
Okay, cool. So that's the four-phase rhinometry. Did I say that right?
Yeah, rhinomanometer. Yeah,
Rhinomanometer. Oh yeah, of course, the rhinomanometer. Um, so
yeah, of course. Come on.
that that's how you measure nasal resistance.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then what's the exact language you would use to say, I want a 3D scan to measure my intermolar width, or maybe it's just that.
Yeah. So like you could do a 3D CT scan or it's called a cone beam. Just be like, you could ask like, I guess the one thing I would always tell parents, especially in the world of airway, is vetting the doctor prior to going. And I would just say, what does their assessment look like? And then or even if you find out like, is this person expanded any kids, your kids' age in the last year? How many have they? Because it's like, if they're not doing it, then it's probably not even something they're looking for. But I think to kind of start somewhere that that they even have an understanding of whether your kid should do that or not, I think is huge in this world. And then I would just ask, does the doctor do cone beam scam, or does he have a way of measuring the intermolar width, and what's their philosophy as far as when to expand?
Okay. Yeah, I think that's really helpful just because it's better than somebody having to call their dentist, which is probably uncomfortable enough, and be like, I listened to two guys on a podcast talk about this thing. So that's why I wanted to get get the exact language around that. Okay, so I think those are good. That's a good place to start for people with intermolar width, either for themselves or for the kids. Pediatrician should be working with a pediatric dentist as well. How to measure nasal resistance. I'll link to all that. Are there any people that are good to follow on either
Yes,
social media or just in this space that you want to point people towards that are kind of have accessible information around any of this?
I would say the Breathe Institute, um, and Dr. Sarush Zagi, he's there. So he's like an ENT and a sleep doc, but he has kind of helped drive that place. There's a Dr. Karen Parker Davidson, and her Instagram handle is the nose. She could be the smartest person I've ever heard when it comes to basically the mechanics and nasal resistance and testing from an airway perspective. I mean, she's super smart. She's very well connected, been in the game for like a long time. And then I would say Dr. Courtney Donka. I think it's Donkoh. She is a pediatric doctor, or a pediatric, basically ortho dentist out of Chicago. And she actually has like a 5-year old daughter that she's expanded. And then she literally does like 15 different kinds of expansion. So I think for people to listen to podcasts from a woman who's a mom as well as like a doc in that world, to hear like she has a podcast on jaw hacks that's like really good, just to hear her talk about like what it's like to try to raise a kid to get the most out of their airway at this age, knowing what she knows as a specialist in that field.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's great. We'll definitely link to all those. I'll try to find some of those podcasts that people have done and link to those as well. Are there any other resources you want to provide? Like, are there any like tools that you use, or is it all just kind of specific to the tools will come with the, I guess, diagnosis and interventions?
Yeah, I guess for kids, like really good. It's called the Myo Munchie. That basically it's like a chewing device, is like really good for stimulation.
Is it like a jaw exercise?
Yeah, not really, but kind of. Great device. And then I really think like the one other thing I would say, like for a lot of parents too, is just some of the different stuff, like either like the intake nasal valves, or like some of these like splints for your nose for like sleeping, especially for like older people. I think like there is nothing better than for someone that's got an undersized airway. It's like these are $5 on Amazon, and literally it's like called the Mute Nasal Dilator, and literally it just sits in your nose. And I mean, my mom thought I was doing like black magic with her nasal resistance. Like she put it in, and literally like it's called a PNIF, where it measures your nasal resistance. My mom was literally, it cut her nasal resistance in half. But my mom's like, for something that easy, it's literally probably like that's the low hanging fruit to help
Yeah, it
most
seems like
people just like sleep better.
pretty good bang for your buck there.
Yeah.
Do you do anything with mouth taping?
It's kind of one of those things that like it's kind of more like, I guess it doesn't change like how I sleep. So it's not like, I guess from all the myofunctional stuff I've done, like I don't feel like when I do it, it like alters anything. I think some people like, I mean, I've seen the research. It's like probably 50% reduction in snoring and stuff. I guess people to just be careful. Like if you have a clog here and now we're taping this, like just, obviously always check with the doctor first. And I think for those that are going to do it without it, like if it's not significantly making it better, I probably tell people not to do it unless you're like, oh, this is game changer. Like Brandon, my business partner, does it, and he's like, dude, it really helps me. And I think it's more of like, because he has enough space, I think it's more of like a postural tool to just kind of his nervous system to keep it in check.
Yep. Yeah, like he might just be getting lazy at night and just the jaw just drops open a little bit. I haven't mouth taped probably since whenever the last time I saw you was, but even around then, I wasn't doing like the strictly actually taping it. It was just sort of like around the lips. It was just providing a little extra pressure to like keep them closed. But if I needed to, I could pop it open.
Yeah.
All right. I don't know that I don't know that anything else or any other resources you wanted to share.
I'm trying to think. One other good woman is so Dr. Sarush Zaghi. He's at the Breathe Institute. His wife, Dr. Nora Zaghi, she's really good as well.
How do you spell that last name?
Zaghi.
Okay. Cool.
But I think like she's really good. She's a pediatric like dentist, like really good, just like from a mom perspective and all that stuff as well.
Okay. Great. All right. So that's all I had on all the mouth stuff. I'd love to just hear about like how work's going though. How's the gym? I loved working there. So I miss the space. I miss the people, you know?
Dude, I feel like this last year has been awesome. Even the last 6 months, like dude, Wyndham literally won the
he's doing great.
US Open.
He's like top 10 right now, right?
Yeah. So I think he finished third last season, but it's like he literally almost won again last weekend. Yeah. And then it's like Sean just won his fight the other night. So it's like
I saw that.
Number one in the world has been cool. And then we brought on, I don't know if you've met Dallas. He was like an ex-pro golfer. He's from Canada.
I know of him. Yeah.
And then we brought on Cole and Nate basically about a year ago. They actually both grew up in Gilbert.
Okay.
But nice. Like, dude, our team is freaking awesome. So it's just been fun. Like everyone's busy.
Yeah.
Major's been in. He's been probably 10, 15 hours a week. So I just feel like it's like this really good, I don't know, it's just fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, the dynamic there is always really fun. It's like kind of going out and doing the entrepreneur thing. It's fun in its own way, but you'll definitely lose like that sort of teamwork camaraderie. Plus like a gym setting is just a little bit more fun than like a remote work from home setting.
Yeah, it's like even today, right? It's like, I don't know, 75, the doors are open. You're like, God, it is just, it's like a bunch of your buddies like joking around. You're like lifting some weight. I don't know, just fun.
Yep. Good music on. And also just to kind of give you a shout out, the people that you were referencing before, Wyndham Clark, PGA. So if you guys want to look him up, if you don't know who he is, stud golfer, trains with Ando there. And then, Sugar Sean O'Malley, he just, defended his title. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah. First time defend.
Yep. Yeah. I was checking Twitter on Saturday night, waiting for that fight to come on. But it seems like he handles himself pretty well, but he trains with your business partner, Brandon.
Yep.
All right, Greg, this is fun catching up. This was more than I would ever thought I would have known about mouth things, but you know, it's probably just scratching the surface for what you know. Hopefully this is helpful for a lot of people because I really do think a lot of this stuff is just kind of be like the next evolution of where diagnosis goes, because I feel like so many things in the world, especially the way we treat things, we just treat symptoms and there's never really a dive into like root cause analysis. So I do think a lot of the stuff, once it becomes more widespread and more well known and better researched, I think it's going to uncover a lot of the mysteries that are kind of out there with people just not really understanding where their symptoms are coming from and why certain interventions aren't working as well as they should be. So I really appreciate you coming on, kind of sharing your knowledge, shedding some light on a lot of these interesting topics. We're going to link to you in the show notes as well. So if people have questions, as I assume they will, hopefully you don't mind them reaching out to you.
No, for sure, man. I appreciate you having me. It's good catching up, dude.
Yeah, appreciate it, Greg. Hey everyone, that's all for today's show. I want to thank you so much for stopping by and watching, especially if you've made it all the way to this point. If you'd like to be notified when new episodes are going to be released, feel free to subscribe and make sure you hit the bell button as well. To learn more about today's guest, feel free to look in the description. You can also visit the podcast website, which is exploringhealthpodcast.com. That website will also be linked in the description. As always, likes, shares, comments are a huge help to me and to this channel and to the show. So any of that you can do, I would really appreciate. And again, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.